the planes, dive bombed Honolulu, and they could see that. They could see the destruction. Same thing with 9/11. When the towers went down, you could see that. People decided that they're going to, all pull together and I think since you can't see this virus, there are too many people who believe, and for too long, that it doesn't exist because they don't have a background in science. Maybe they probably just slept through their science classes until they got out of high school, and that was good enough for them. But you have a lot of this. You do have to sort of take on faith that this is the way, these little invisible things that you can't see work. And I think that it's been a long, hard road to get people to understand that.
You're right. No, that's it. That's the Reader's Digest version. That's it in a nutshell. And if you look throughout history, most of the times, even in this country, the reason that the economy took a big nosedive was because of some type of thing like a pandemic. I mean, many times it's been because of a pandemic, or a sickness or an illness or something like that. Because it just throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing. And there's nobody alive that's experienced anything like this ever. Maybe somebody that's 100 years old, sure, but there's only a handful of them around. You know what I mean? But you're right. You can't see it. And we've never experienced it before. I mean, you can't have your father say, well, you know what, back in 1945, when men were men and women were glad of it, this happened and we did that. Well, we don't have anybody to give us that advice.
Well, the conversation has reminded me of two things. One is something else I put up, which said basically, what happened to the good old days when people trusted their doctors and didn't trust politicians? The other is what you were just saying about. Oh gosh, I lost it. Experience. We've reached a point in our society where people don't think we need vaccines or screaming we don't want vaccines because they don't remember what it was like before they were around. We don't need environmental regulations because they're forgetting what it was like before those were around. And they're saying the same thing about some of the labor laws. Because they don't remember. The societal memory has forgotten completely why any of those things were put in the first place. And, that's kind of why, the numbers start going down and then they turn around and go back up again. Oh, it's over. No, it's not.
Go ahead, Joe. No, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, at this point, we have one remaining member of the previous generation who was my 90-year-old aunt. And my parents are gone, Eugene's parents are gone, but my Aunt Virginia remembers not the pandemic of 1918, but she does remember when they quarantined people for polio. Mm-hmm. She does remember when if there was a sickness in the area, that literally that they did put up, banners across doors. You were not to go in that person's house. And, she's 90, knock on wood, she's doing very well with the mask, and she lives by herself with, doing the mask and the distancing and whatever. But, that she's been telling me about that from her perspective, but that's the closest thing that I know to somebody who's ever went through anything like this. She remembers when she was a kid that they somebody in the neighborhood got polio, and they literally stayed in for like most of a month, mm-hmm. just because her parents were afraid that she and my father would contract it.
Well, I barely remember that because I was such a small child. But yes, my mother would not let us play with other children in the summertime because that's how you got polio. And I remember when the vaccine came out.
Yeah. And all of that is true. And in this country, we have it so good in this country. And compared to most other countries, anyone in the United States and the Western world as a whole, but United States in particular, we have it so good. We just have it so good that whenever we come upon a hardship like this, we don't want to accept it. We think, well, we can get past that. We can ignore it. We're this, we're that. And we've had to make sacrifices that have really been hard. I mean, I haven't hugged my mother for a year now. That's hard. That's very hard for me. But I respect her. She says, nope, we're not doing that. Not till this whole thing's done. I don't want to get it. And she's right. If her or my father get it, I'm blessed beyond belief. My parents are both still alive. But they've had health problems. If they were to get it, they probably wouldn't make it. And they understand that. And they're very cautious. And I'm very respectful of that. But this is difficult. We've not come across anything like this. Sure, you're right. Your 90-year-old aunt remembers this, but I don't. You don't. Eugene doesn't. We don't remember this. We've never experienced this. This is uncharted territory for us.
One thing that's interesting to me, and I have a lot of friends down in South Central Missouri, a lot of rural people down there, and they come to the city for their health care for the most part. If it's anything significant, either to St. Louis or Springfield. Mm-hmm. What's been amazing to me is the number of medical people from down in that area who are against vaccination.
Medical people?
Yes.
Really?
Nurses, doctors, yes. This has just blown my mind, and it takes a lot to blow my mind, and this one does. I mean, I understand on a case-by-case basis. I have a friend who has always had bad reactions to flu vaccines. She doesn't get a flu vaccine, and you know, they said, well, she said, I don't know if I'm going to get a vaccine or not because of the fact that I've had bad reactions before. Okay, that's a per person. You know, she's not a bad person for saying this or for, you know, thinking about her options. But when you get people who are RNs, who are, you know, mostly down there, they don't have a lot of MDs, but they do have a lot of DOs. Mm-hmm. But even somebody who's a doctor of osteopathy has got, you know, a fair medical training.
Sure.
And, you know, and then they're saying, well, you know, this is, you know, Bill Gates is going to chip us if we do this. I'm going, you know, I can understand this if this is, you know, Billy Bob back to Gravel Road who, you know, worked real hard to get through 10th grade. But that's not these people I'm hearing from it. And that's very confusing. And I just wonder, you know, how can you do that having gone through at least a, you know, a college degree plus your medical training, and you still say, oh, those vaccines are bad for people. I do not get it.
Well, it's always good to try to educate yourself, even though it's been many years since at least I've been to any type of formal education. You read, you study, you learn, you're constantly educating yourself. And you remember from back in the radio days, nobody loved a conspiracy theory more than me. I love conspiracy theories, and I still do if it comes to UFOs or Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. I still love that stuff, okay? But what turned me around and really got me to thinking is I had extra time on my hands one time in Dallas, Texas. So I went to Dealey Plaza, and I stood at the spot on the road where Kennedy took the gunshot to the head. And I looked up at the window where Lee Harvey Oswald shot him from. And I thought to myself, that's not such a hard shot to make. It's not a hard shot at all. And the guy that made it was a Marine Corps sharpshooter, or he had a marksman's medal. Okay. And at that point I thought, you know what? The whole Kennedy thing's baloney. He was shot by a guy from that window in a moving convertible.
Well, PBS did a thing on conspiracy theories, and they said one of the things that feeds them is a bad outcome. And they used that example. They said Kennedy was shot and he died, and people don't buy the one shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Reagan was shot and he lived, and people are perfectly happy with the one shooter.
Because there wasn't the bad result.
Because it wasn't the bad result. Getting back to some of the other things, people, well, you mentioned it. One of the problems is there's no editors or truth checkers on the internet. And unfortunately, a lot of people are out there putting up their own, quote, facts, unquote, which have nothing to back them up. The chip is one of those things. It's kind of interesting. I know someone put up, there was a circuit diagram circulating that this was the circuit for the chip, and they identified the actual home appliance that it was the circuit diagram for. But this is where, again, unfortunately, a lot of people wouldn't be exposed to this. But I know about the locator chips and things that are being used to track the bears in Missouri and things and whatever. And let me tell, and how they're applied and how big they are. And you are not going to have a chip put in you that you don't know about, because it is not going to be so small and fit through that tiny little needle that they apply. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Getting back to some of what you were saying about people not wanting to cope with something that's so unfamiliar and bad. One of the things that I've come across, and then even this recently, is the claim, that, the death count from COVID is not that bad. Hospitals are falsifying the death certificates to say COVID because they'll get more money for this. That's one of the conspiracy theories.
Right.
I've checked this, and there's one big problem with that. If they were changing the cause of death, that would increase the number of COVID deaths. That would not increase the number of total deaths. Last year, there was a 12% jump in the number of deaths in the United States over the previous year, and that almost exactly matched the number of COVID deaths.
So, yeah, and have they misclassified some? Yeah, they probably have. But I saw that same statistic that you did. If the number of deaths, the average number of deaths is X, we're now X plus 12%. And if you take that 12%, there's your 400,000 or 420,000 or whatever it is. So the numbers do pretty much equal out. Now, does that mean that some death certificates were stamped wrong? Sure, there were. I'm certain that some of them were. Okay. But it's not a conspiracy theory.
Well, and there's something else too, and I actually had this discussion with my doctor, and she says, I love talking with you and Joe because you're intelligent, you're smart, you know these things. But the point I was making with her was, again, part of the denial. They didn't die of COVID, they died of pneumonia. Definition of pneumonia, fluid on the lungs. What does COVID cause amongst its other symptoms? Fluid on the lungs.
Sure. Well, and that's how so many of these flu deaths come about too.
Yeah. Because
the flu is a virus, but pneumonia can be bacterial, and because you have fluid on the lungs, a bacterial infection starts or comes about, and that's what you die from.
Yeah, you can have bacterial pneumonia, you can have viral pneumonia.
Sure.
COVID can cause a viral pneumonia. Mm-hmm. So it's not, they didn't die of this, they died of this other thing. The two are the same thing.
Sure. This caused that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to have you two on, because I consider you two, I would say reasonable individuals. Okay. Sometimes it's fun to talk with people who are way out there and on a strange end of